What's it?
Now, if this is any chance you can't get back in, just look at it in case it's better. I'm pretty sure. It's all right. Don't have to whisper. Oh, evening. Oh, in here. Good. Yes, I'll sit right in the middle. I'm good. I'm sorry.
I only arrived Sunday.
There's a drink to give you a phone. They didn't with dinner, so I don't know if you want to just grab 15 minutes. No, it's day by day.
I'll link it.
Yeah.
I think it's that kind of, and also stable.
So I'm coming down.
About 30 seconds after I breathe.
It's just my birthday.
Yeah.
Because you've got to drink all the nice red
I was going to say there must be sweet.
The whole table with
Oh, no, I'm alumni.
How old are you?
And you get certain, and you had, then you had, well,
It's really
It's like
Okay, yeah.
so those red
Yeah.
take them on and off the road, you're only allowed one location. It's one of those things that just don't kind of matter. And then it's literally held on by belt.
It's fun. It's very big confidence.
Stream and make sure you.
My mother, who is 75,
We haven't broken anything since. Yeah, no, that's nice. Oh, more or less.
she's writing about the history of Bristol.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
We certainly could. Oh, yes. Tomorrow morning.
You're most responsible for I'm here. Tomorrow. So
So can't.
The son of people you talks.
you don't tell me that. It's never a mark like this, but
First time ever you met you.
It's a
you never quite see how yeah, I could do it at all.
yeah.
No. Yeah. Okay. Good.
In a way, it's not like a bad age. I mean, kind of it's like a pan. Imagine like tamale. Kind of like.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you here this evening to St Edmunds College. Those of you who are coming from outside the college, you're very welcome indeed. My name is Chris Young. I'm the Master, and I'm delighted that we have this panel today, Game On, Sport, Mental Health and the Future of Black Excellence. It's particularly fitting for two reasons. Firstly, this is World Mental Health Day, so we couldn't have planned this better. And secondly, it is the end of the first week of term, depending how you count it, but in a normal person's calendar, this is the end of the first week of term. We take mental health and mental well-being incredibly seriously at St Edmunds, like many and most of the colleges. So this is a perfect way to be rounding up this very, very busy week, which has been full of matriculations, etc. So we're going to be going through a little program. There'll be an award given in a moment, and then there'll be a panel discussion. And I've had a wonderful half hour or so already with the speakers and panelists this evening. And I'm not going to introduce them because they will be introduced by my colleague in a second. So what I'm going to do just briefly is to thank the person who brought this event to the college and to introduce our own colleague who will be leading it. So Alicia Jones is the instigator of the event. Alicia is an associate professor in the music faculty. And she came to us not so very long ago from Indiana University, Bloomington. Before that, she had been named an innovator at the University of Chicago and at the Harvard Divinity School. She is an ordained preacher, as well as an operatic lyric soprano, and has performed around the world. I'm not going to list all the boards and academic societies that she is a member of, but there are many. She consults for museums, conservatories, seminaries, arts organisations on curriculum, live and virtual event programming and content development. Her book, from the Oxford University Press, Flaming, The Peculiar Theopolitics of Fire and Desire in Black Male Gospel Performance, broke new ground, and examining the role of gospel music making in constructing and renegotiating gender identity among Black men. So I first encountered Alicia's CV when I was head of school, to translate that into the terms that other universities used when I was dean. My colleague who was chairing the panel, I had got a bit wise to panels going a bit native and chairing themselves, so I put someone from outside each faculty into chair appointments, and that was chaired by Professor Mark Kinker, who was my closest colleague in medieval German studies, who has got one of the most exacting minds that I've ever met. He taught me, and I became a colleague. So Mark called me up that evening very excitedly, and he said, "You're going to like this person before you sign it. You're going to like this person. She writes on Whitney Houston." I said, "Where do I sign?" Then he said, "Even better than that, she's brilliant." I said, "Get it over here quickly." And in fact, that is indeed been proven. It's been brilliant to have you here, Alicia, and you think differently and you bring different connections beyond the academic world. This evening is precisely an example of that. I mentioned that Alicia was an ordained preacher. She was raised as a Pentecostal. I see a Pentecostal inflected. We can discuss that later. Non-denominational Christian. And a fourth generation preacher on both sides of her family. And she's joined this evening by her husband, Calvin Taylor Skinner, who's a minister and activist. This makes this event and its genesis doubly appropriate for St Edmund. St Edmunds was a college founded in the aftermath of the 1871 University Tests Act, which allowed nonconformists, Catholics, we'll put it in the right order, Catholics, nonconformists and non-Christians to apply to the universities of Oxford and Cambridge. This was founded as a Catholic college, but it has since developed a broad range of diverse religious backgrounds in it, and is a college where faith is taken very seriously and is in the air and is a very constant topic. As a non-conformist myself, Belfast Brethren, Baptist and Presbyterian, depending what time of the day it was that Sunday, this event then resonates with your background, Alicia. So thank you very much for bringing it. So Alicia's going to come up in a second to take the first part of this session. And then she'll be handing over to our Director of Student Wellbeing, so Dr. Kovale Somi, who is a chartered psychologist. And I think this time last year you were away, I seem to remember, because you were picking up your PhD. So congratulate you publicly a year later. Probably co-chairs the Wellbeing Leads Network, which is an intercollegiate community of wellbeing leads across the 31 Cambridge colleges. She's led multicultural student support services in educational institutions and non-profit organisations in Africa and the UK, and she works at the intersection of mental health and educational development. We very much appreciate the approach that you bring to here us at St Edmunds, which is that mental health in educational settings needs to be emphasised as something where well-being is inextricably linked to community. And we've talked about that, and we will be developing that more, I'm sure. So thank you both for your part in bringing this event and leading it this evening. And we look forward to what you've got for us in the next hour or so. So, Alicia, over to you.
Great day. I'm told this is a very high-tech room with amplification in the ceiling. I'm accustomed to a microphone or a lapel mic, so this is going to be interesting. I am Reverend Dr. Alicia Lola Jones, and I'm so honored to be able to think together with the Master of St. Edmund College, Dr. Chris Young. Thank you so much for opening up this space to us in celebration of the UK's Black History Month. It's also NFL week here in the UK, so many intersections, As I think about this event and the homage that this has brought about, I think about this famous question posed by a beloved thinker, clergy activist, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the book entitled Why We Can't Wait. Often as scholars, when we are in the silos of academia, we are told that we have to be really focused on the research at hand. However, when I look at the work of faith leaders, activists, and people who understand their research to be an intervention, there's often no better time than the present to do work that impacts their communities. And that is what gave rise to an initiative my sister and I founded almost 15 years ago called Genius for Men. I was a doctoral student at the University of Chicago, and there's a longer story there, but what's useful for our time together is a sort of somber moment just short of graduation at the University of Chicago. A young man who was a doctoral student in the sciences, he was murdered. And when he was murdered, there was a lag in notifying the community on campus about his demise, largely because in Chicago, it was presumed he was not a student at the University of Chicago. Following his murder and then the subsequent distribution of the news, I, alongside my friends, we began to think about who do we presume are the students at UChicago? What does a genius look like? What does a thought leader look like? And those questions actually were what fueled my research, thinking through how Black men on a campus like UChicago move about. And as a result, my sister and I began to do a conference as well as an award show where we got the opportunity to amplify the stories of men from various walks of life who were meeting the mark in our communities. We had actors, musicians, publishers, like the head of Black Enterprise magazine, actor Lamont Rucker, as well as one of our panelists this evening, Attorney Joe Briggs, who has done a lot of work at the intersection of public policy and business. The roll call is quite prestigious. And so when I was in conversation with Dr. Young about these sorts of connections, we saw an immediate opportunity to recognize someone who is on the front lines here in the UK, thinking about equity, diversity, and inclusion with regard to sports, and in particular policies that make sure that there's a more inclusive future for folks who, some would say, break their bodies in order to entertain us. He's doing quite thoughtful work. We've actually had the opportunity to observe his intentionality behind the scenes, and I'm eager for you to hear some of the strategies that he has been unlaying for us over the last several months. So I would like to invite my husband, Reverend Calvin Taylor Skinner, and Attorney Briggs to help me present this to our dear friend. We would like to present the commendation for genius in equity, diversity, inclusion, and sport to Mr. Delroy Corinaldi. Would you please join us as well for a photo? This is yours. And we have a larger award on the way for you as well.
$10 million coming my way.
10 million wishes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you
Oh,
would.
my goodness. First things first. My name's Delroy Corinaldi, and I'm not Italian. Just so you all know. Right. I'm also not a lecturer, so I won't be standing here for an hour giving you just a talk that I've given to my students over and over again. Neither, although I set up an organization, co-founded, called the Black Footballers Partnership, shall I be speaking for 45 minutes in the way in which they play the game in each half. Now, look, I'm truly honored to get this award, and I have to say, a bit humbled by it, to be honest with you. I can't remember the last time I had an award. I was a head boy at my secondary school. I shy away from them generally. But I think when you get an award like this, you recognize, actually, it's never about you. You think it's about you because it's got your name on it, but actually it's never about you. It's about what you stand for. It's about your values, about your mission. It's about those connections you have along the way. But actually, for me, whenever I get these things, I always think of my mom, right? Who, a single parent, brought myself and my brother up. And for her, it was about just don't get into trouble. We're on this council estate, yes, a lot of people get into trouble. Don't get into trouble. Any job will do, just don't get into trouble. And here I am from council estate to Cambridge, right? and I think of my mom a lot, but I also think of my grandfather, who was from the Caribbean, from Jamaica. And he fought in World War II. I got the badge, but never got the recognition. Got the medal, but never got the recognition until some years later, which demonstrates some of the issues we have in this country around recognizing we are a melting pot of all sorts of people. My grandfather used to say to me, Delroy, whatever you do, in his gruff voice, make sure you read the news, because you need to know what's going on, right? And that was one of his ways of centering me away from what else was going around me, to focusing on learning, the importance of learning and the importance of community. And that filtered through to my brother, my lovely brother, older than me, better looking, but older than me. And he, for the last 30 years, has worked in a local engineering factory in Wolverhampton, where I'm from. He's only ever taken 2 routes to work, right? But he's dedicated, he's passionate, he's a union member. And he got his job through someone who lived 3 doors away from us, a white man called Alex, who provided that gateway for him to get to the job that he now has. And next door to us was a white lady called Beryl and her husband Tom, much older than myself, much older than my mom when we moved in all those years ago. What did they do for us? They welcomed us, right? Because it was quite an interesting place. For those of you that know Enoch Powell, you understand that Wolverhampton has those connotations. Welcomed us. She would always buy us rock when she went to Blackpool or Skegness when she went on holiday. Right? She would bake cakes for us, apple pie being my favourite. But she would also buy books for my grandfather, and had her buy me books, Black Power Salute and various other things. Because again, for her, she could see my mother wanted us to work hard and she wanted us to be better than the sum of our parts. And I tell you all of this because again, this award isn't about me. It's about those people who helped bring me up, my community, my head teacher, who I'm still friendly with today, his son, who wrote a recent story about me, still friendly with today. My university, I went to Manchester, sorry, not right? My university pals, who I met on the very first day, still speak to them every day. My now wonderful wife and my family of 4 girls. I'm a girl dad. Right? I'm hearing things that back in the day a man should not hear. But I'm getting texts from my daughter about everything, menstruation cycle, you name it, I'm in it. Right? one of them, by the way, said, "Daddy, why are you being a traitor? I'm at Oxford, you shouldn't be here." Again, family, community, friendship, networks, right? And I've been quite fortunate in my working life to have worked across the corporate world, the consumer world, the charity world, the consultancy world. I've worked in politics. I've been very blessed to have worked in politics with towering figures. Some may like them, some may not. From Diane Abbott to the current Justice Secretary David Lammy, who I see as dear friends. Right? Again, family, community, networks, connections, learning. So I've been very blessed to have been amongst what I call these individuals that have helped build these little pieces of my jigsaw puzzle, which then allows me to do things like setting up Financial Inclusion Centre with someone I worked with for a while, trying to bring that inclusiveness to financial services. Setting up an organisation called DigiBridge with one of my university colleagues, which is about bridging that digital gap from East London, where the Bengali community could see Canary Wharf, but never ever had that opportunity to get those jobs. To setting up, which is one of the reasons I'm here now, co-founding with some elite footballers, some of whom I'm sure I'll talk about, the Black Footballers Partnership. Now, why is that very dear to me? As a kid, I played a little bit, right? Like, you know, as a kid, I traveled from Wolverhampton to London, where, you know, nowadays at that age you'd have to do it with a parent, you have to get signed off, but I'd happily travel down on the train. I think I was like 14. I'd be a kid playing for Arsenal Football Club, the kids side, right? And I was there for a while. And Andy Cole, you can tell my age, Andy Cole, Kevin Campbell, these very big stars who played for Arsenal. And I could always, when I was there, and I remember Kevin Campbell said this at his memorial, Kevin Campbell would come to me, you definitely want to be a footballer, you want to be a footballer. I said, I don't think so, Kevin, because I just can't see where, A, it's risky, right? You play football, it's like that. There's 100 of you and then 0.001, 0.2% make it. But also for me, I always, as I said, I was head boy at primary school and secondary school. I always thought to myself, well, actually, there has to be a way of leading, not just playing. So the Black Footballers Partnership for me came about from a very long time ago. And it was, okay, why is it we can be entertainers, earned entertainers on the pitch, celebrated, yes, but we're not the leaders, right? That didn't quite add up for me. So what you'll hear about when I talk is my background in data, in strategy, in comms, in influencing, in changing laws, and all of those things, in order to bring on a generation of people, footballers who you will know, who come the age of 35, from many of them, end up in a situation where they're celebrated, they're still celebrated, their income's dropped, and their well-being drops with it.
Wow.
And it's for that reason I've continued with this wonderful project called Black Footballers Partnership. And my kids are going, well, there's 4 of us, you need to feed us, what are you doing there? Because actually for me, with the data, working with some wonderful academics around the world, from Michigan, from Liverpool, from Amsterdam, and many more that want to work with us because they can see the value of it. For me, if we can use football, and which is such a data-driven sport, we know who scores, we know who stops the ball game, and we actually know how many points a manager gets per game, right? If we can use football to tell the story of life, where yes, DEI is clearly a factor, it's actually about merit. None of those guys or women, because we also represent women, make it on the pitch unless they're good enough. And then something happens when their career finishes. So I say to Dr. Alicia, thank you very much for this award. Calvin, brother, thank you. Joe, wonderful. All of you who are now part of my jigsaw puzzle, thank you very much for all your support here this evening. And thank you very much for this award.
Another congratulations.
Thank you.
And I enjoy what you highlight for us about how mental health well-being is inextricably linked to our communities, to finance, to our socio-political histories. And today we seek to use football as a vehicle to tell a story and to highlight the importance, and particularly on World Mental Health Day, as Chris said, how important it is to, in our context, sustainable academic practices that accumulate to excellence, but also more broadly to Black excellence, and particularly Black excellence in sport. So I'd like to invite our panelists to please take a seat and we'll get started with our conversation. I feel quite privileged to be sitting here with this excellent group of leaders, and maybe to start us off, to share a little bit about ourselves, to share a little bit, as you've done, Delroy, around the story that brings us here, and also to highlight why sport, mental health, and Black excellence is particularly close to our hearts. I'll hand over to you, Reverend Skinner.
Okay. Thank you, Boulay,
Yes.
for just being gracious and hosting us, and to Dr. Young. And good evening, everyone. I'm a Baptist minister from the U.S. South. So my wife said I can be time blind. So I wrote down my introduction for us this evening. And so if I may, I'd like to honor the shoulders I stand on, particularly my uncle, Reverend Thomas Skinner. We come from a long legacy of ministers myself. And he was a spiritual advisor, among other things, as this is our family business and corporate world and sports and academia. But he was particularly, what stands out, he was an advisor to Arthur Ashe, who was the first Black man to win the singles championship in the Wimbledon and the U.S. Open and the Australian Open. And he also served as chaplain for then the Washington Redskins. They're now the Washington Commanders, the NFL American football team. And so that connection, being the chaplain of the football team, didn't necessarily convince me to become a fan of the Washington then Redskins. However, I did fall in love with the nation's capital of the U.S., Washington, D.C., so much so I had to get my wife from D.C., and I had to marry Dr. Alicia Lola Jones. My uncle modeled for me what it means to engage people as whole beings, to see not only their spirit, but their lived experience. He taught me that faith and justice are not separate pursuits. They are inseparable parts of the same calling. And as a faith leader, I have the privilege of mentoring student athletes across several U.S. colleges and directing a youth organization in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, that use sport to reach young people navigating poverty and violence. And through that work, I learned that empowerment doesn't come from speaking at people, but from walking with the people. Faith and justice remain at the heart of my work because too often the systems that shape our community in sport, education, public life, etc., overlook the full humanity of those they claim to serve. My uncle used to say, everybody talking about heaven ain't necessarily going to heaven. And I think that whenever I hear people talk about inclusion or mental health, because they are talking about it, they're talking about the change, but living it out is another thing. So again, I'm Reverend Calvin Taylor Skinner, and as a faith leader committed to serving people fully, serving them wholly, and challenging the systems that wound them, I am honored to be part of this conversation, exploring how sport, and for me, faith and justice can work together to strengthen our mental health, our communities, and the future of Black excellence.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Reverend Skinner. I enjoy what you're saying about moving beyond just talking about inclusion, and actually asking ourselves critically, what does it look like to support inclusion systemically? What does it look like to support excellence and progress, and the faith and the justice aspects is just as important. So thank you. I'll then hand over to Attorney Joe Briggs to introduce himself.
You know, funny enough, I'm also the son of a Southern Baptist preacher. Though he took the time to move to California, he became the senior pastor and bishop of Los Angeles County. Dr. J.L. Briggs was my father. Passed away a few years ago, but he left some things behind, including a desire for me to be everything he thought I could. You see, my father grew up in Sunflower County, Mississippi. And if you know anything about Sunflower County, Mississippi, it's in the Delta, right up the street from Itta Bena, which is where Mississippi Valley State is, but also where several civil rights leaders lost their lives because they were fighting for equality. And he grew up a sharecropper, and much as his father before him, much as his family members before them. And they all understood that they were part of a larger system of economics. That larger system of economics made money for a bunch of people other than the people who actually did the work. See, their bodies were used in an opportunity to pick the cotton that was there in Sunflower County, and that Sunflower County cotton ended up in the jeans and the jeans, jeans, G-E-N-E, and jeans, J-E-A-N, around the world. And people made money off both. They made money off the genes of the people who grew their bodies and their muscles and used those muscles to do things like go to places like the University of Mississippi to play football later in life. And also the genes that people wore, the blue jeans that people snuck into other countries. Those dollars, however, never quite made it back to them. What did stay with them was the mental anguish that was related to how they were treated. And those stories made their way down to me, a young kid who grew up in the state of Florida and grew up on the other side of my family with them picking fruit, also as migrant farmers, also as sharecroppers, also as people who use their bodies to bring to the world sunshine in the form of orange juice, sunshine that they didn't see themselves because their bodies were used to bring it to someone else, but their bodies were able to bring that juice from the oranges that they picked and that juice that they were able to put in their blood through other generations to have athletes that came out of those places that then went on to entertain other people. And so then you have me. The product of both of these things, the cotton that ended up in the jeans and the oranges that ended up in the sunshine and the blood. And I had the ability to go through a number of things myself, including undergrad where I played college football at Texas Christian University, and also grad school where I went to Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, one of our historically Black colleges and universities in the highest of Seven Hills of Tallahassee, Florida, then law school at Florida State University, and then a small school called Harvard Business School after that. But that means that I just have a brain that's cost me a bunch of money. But I spent all that money on my brain knowing that my body had already been used in ways that I thought were necessary to sacrifice so that I can get to all those places, because I couldn't get in those spaces without having sacrificed some of those things that came from the genes and came from the juice.
Wow.
And so now here I stand before you after having spent a career working in sports, trying to find ways to make sure that I can have the ability to return some of those dollars that were perhaps missed by generations before to the athletes who had played in the professional ranks of the National Football League. Yes, I spent 16 years as senior counsel at the National Football League. Yes, I did negotiate over $200 billion worth of player contracts, and I have created more black millionaires than probably anyone else in this room or this country or maybe even in this world because of the work that I've done. And I've allowed that work to help them keep much of that money in their pockets while many people tried to take it away from them. And as we look at the future of sport and we talk about mental health today, the thing that may be missed is how getting close to your goal of liberation, perhaps through funding, perhaps through getting away from the sharecroppers, perhaps from getting away from picking fruit, is sometimes an illusion that escapes you. And that quest to get there is sometimes damaging to your mental health when the support systems are not there.
Wow.
Right.
Because those athletes, many of whom earn millions of dollars by sacrificing their body, because their bodies were built on the genes and the juice,
I hear you.
they earned more money than anyone else in their lineage thought they could.
Right.
But they also saw it slip through their fingertips and go to benefit communities that they will never be welcomed into.
Right.
Truly. And so how do we then think about the future of athletics? I know I'm across the pond, and I know here you have academies and systems, and you call soccer football and football soccer. And I'll be as respectful as I can of those sports, because my good friend Delroy, who's not an Italian, has taught me a bunch about them. And so by way of introduction, before I take my seat, I hope that we get into a conversation about how, after their usefulness for our entertainment is done, we can make sure they feel useful to the communities that they have been pulled away from, put in a bubble, wrapped in bubble wrap, and then taken to another level, only to be discarded like so much rubbish in the bin. They need that bubble wrap taken off of them. Perhaps they need a way to get back into the community so that they can realize the importance and import of the juice and the genes on both sides of their lives, so that they can understand and realize that they were always important to us, not just when they were popular and on our television screens or when they were on posters and social media, but because their blood was our blood, because their genes were our genes, and because the sunshine was the sunshine that we always saw in them from the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow. The juice and the genes. Wow.
That'll breach.
Wow. Wow. There is a lot to explore and unpack there. Thank you. Before we do,
I get another go. Good. Pay-per-view. I should have. So my name's Doro Coronelli, and I'm not an Italian. I mean, great speakers, right? What more do I need to add? I've told you where I've come from. I've told you a bit about who I am. But maybe this kind of helps a little bit. Last week before, I did a presentation after dinner speech, right? Wasn't very good, but it was all right. No, an after dinner speech to about 16 leaders, senior trade unionists, as in senior trade unionists, senior industrialists, as in senior industrialists, as well as administrators and academics. And they want to talk about governance. And because, one of the challenges now is making sure your organizations are doing the right thing. And this applies significantly to the world of sports, where money buys you the club, gets you into the system, perhaps the leadership and various mechanisms for running it are in question. And I was challenged actually at the after dinner speech by because members of the House of Lords were there and so on, by one of the members of the House of Lords who, if I said the name, you'd know it, and he said, well, you know, it's football and, you know, what the black players got to complain about, right, in effect. You know, they've got the PFA and they're doing a good job, right? It's Players Football Association, which is the trade union for footballers. And I said to him, well, yeah, that's one way of looking at it, but the data tells us, in terms of the Premier League, 43% of the players look like me. The data tells us that for those jobs that go to former players, only 4% of those jobs go to people that look like me. So when you were representing your members as a trade unionist, and he has plenty of members, you would be there for your employees. I'm telling you, 43% of the employees are not getting that support. And I have to say, when he went, actually, I see that point, you know, I took that as a win. And the reason I take it as a win is, I mean, I've been in many a taxi, I'm sure most of you have. And you talk to a taxi driver and you're going to do a TV interview and whatever else. And the taxi driver says, you know, what are you going to be? Oh, I was doing a Sky interview. What are you going to talk about? And I said, oh, well, black players getting managerial spots. And he said, but they're doing quite well. And I said, yeah, but that's on the pitch. What about off the pitch? And he said, I hadn't thought of that, right? And I think one of the challenges we have is to look beyond the optics. We're so caught up in the optics that we can forget about the systemic issues that are going on behind. I mean, Cambridge, I mean, you do all of these things every day and all day. And for me, when you then start looking at the human stories behind the data, you get to the heart of why we're here today in terms of sport, excellence, well-being. In sport, England played last night, and I don't want to bring it down to race, but I will for this. All three players were black who scored. Generally speaking, for England national team, 50% of the players on the pitch look like us. For the under-21s, it's 70%, right? That's optics. Backroom staff, there's only one person there, my friend Justin, and he only recently became, Justin Cochran, only recently became part of that backroom staff. And then you get the story, the human story of a former England player, won't mention, great guy, you'll know him if I said his name. And when I started this project, it was really about the data, and I really wanted to do the data. Premier League, FA, here are the data, we haven't collected it. I mean, it's been around for a long time. I've only been doing this organisation for 2 years at the time. Get on with it, I can go on with the rest of my life. But when I spoke to this former England player, he almost brought me to tears. Delray, I said, what? I was more polite than that. I said, what's happening? I said, look, my life's just collapsing. I said, what do you mean, life's collapsing? He said, well, my wife wants to leave me. I can't get any work. And all the relationships I thought I had throughout my time as a footballer, they were based on the 10%. Agent wanted 10%, family members wanted 10%, friends wanted to hang around me to get into the best venues, right? Guy was broken. The next day, I was on the train to where he lives, first time we'd ever met, and he just unloaded, right? Now he's one of my better friends. He's in a, not because of me, but he's in a far better position. What I'm trying to say to you there is, and we'll come on to it as we get onto the various other areas, you see the footballer, right, on the pitch, and they are like that, chest out, because they have to be. Because to get there, it's a big thing, right? We'll come on against those numbers later. But once they leave the pitch and they go into a bar, they're still like this, because they have to be. Because everyone remembers the goal they scored in the World Cup in 19, whatever it was. But actually behind that mask, there's a lot of loneliness there, a lot of heartache there, right? Because actually, they're doing a job. And now that job's over because they retire twice. after earning 100 grand a year, you may not feel anything for them. 100 grand a week, maybe 200 grand a week. That money soon goes. You get divorced, you lose half of it. You carry on spending because you've not been taught anything else. You gamble, money goes, right? So thank you very much for putting this on today. It's probably one of the most valuable things to be doing to an audience that will, I'm sure, get to grips with these issues, because the well-being for those athletes, is the lack of help and support and wrapping your arm around these athletes once their career finishes is pretty pitiful. And actually, if the game's not giving these black players jobs afterwards, there's no generational wealth there. It soon goes. Thank you very much.
And let's dive right in. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that bubble wrap. And let's talk about that mask. And let's talk about what are some of the processes, the mechanism, be they social, be they institutional, be they cultural, that push the mental health of black men in sport to the margins. Joe?
So some of the cultural things that I believe push those people to the margins are the expectations that are placed on them. Delroy touched on it a bit, right? Like that expectation of the 10%, that the agent will get a certain amount, that the family will get a certain amount, that the friends will hang around while they have access to certain things. And all of the time that they're going through this, they are in the middle of that bubble. And that bubble says that I have to continue being this person or else all of these people will go away. And all of those people have been there for you for those reasons for a significant period of time. In order for you to become a professional athlete, there's at least more than likely 5 to 10 years worth of hardcore investment that you've made in the practice and purpose of your sport in order for you to get to a place where you are able to earn. And if you started that when you were a mere teenager, the entire world that's been built around you has pushed you into a funnel where this is the only outcome. If you make it to this outcome, then these are the things that have to happen around you so that you can sustain that positioning. And so what happens when people start to realize that the shine that they saw wasn't actually gold, it was pyrite. Or maybe it was mesonoite. And maybe it wasn't, maybe it was a lab-grown diamond and versus something else, and the chips start falling away because the injuries come and the things that happen to your body, which is a living and breathing thing that has to have wear and tear on it because that's the only way you get there, starts to fall apart as well. I get pushed to the margins because there's no buffer, really. Because even though all those people are around me and I was in that bubble, it wasn't truly a bubble wrap for me. It wasn't safety protection for me. It was safety protection for all of them, right? The agent had safety protection in the way that they were earning money off of your living, but they also probably had other clients. The friends got access to all of the things, but then after they got their access through you, they went back to their normal lives where they were setting up their savings accounts and figuring out how they were going to live once this reality was removed from them. And so you got pushed to the margins because when you got pushed, everybody jumped out of the way.
Yeah. And so can we say then, can we position sport as a vehicle for Black excellence? Is that fair? Can sport sustain that? And what are some of the scaffolds, Delroy, that you've been a part of into scaffolding that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I love football, right? Love it. I love rugby. I love athletics, right? I think they're all wonderful. I've even seen Greg play tennis, you know. Professor Young over there. You know,
And track and field.
and track and field. Honestly, I truly love one, and I love seeing just talent get through. I don't care what they look like. If they're great, be great, right? I mean, that's my thing. In sport, you only ever make it on that pitch as cricket, football, rugby, you name it, because you are talented. right? There's no DEI in that. If you're good enough, you're on it, right? Let's say, I think it's, what is it, in the academy system, forgive me if I get this number wrong, but I think it's 0.0012% that make it into the Premier League club from the academy, right? It's tiny, right? So that is actually excellence. Whatever your skin color, it's excellence to make it, right? The reason I'm going to put black excellence in it is because there's no pathway or opportunity beyond that. So they stop it. And we're going to define, I guess. It's what I call the grass ceiling, right? Play on the grass, you hit this level. So yeah, there's black excellence there. And what the question we've yet to delve into, which I'd love to be able to do, is I've kind of broken it down to 4 groups of black footballer, really, or footballer. One is the retired, one is those with penultimate contracts, 28, 29, 30, like a Tyrone Mings, Then you got those who are in the midst of their career, like the Bukayo Saka. And then you got the academy stroke first year pro. First year pro is I want to do this work, actually get to know them a bit better. Probably the first year pro is probably the worst one, really, because they get the pro contract and they assume they're going to get more, and they start spending more than they're earning, and then they fall through this gap, right? I mean, I need to do the work on it to fully get my head around it. But if I break into those 4 categories, and then I say to you only a small number come through to the top, unlike the American system, which again I need to know better, our lot in football, at the age of 8, 9, 10, 11, that's it. They're in this funnel. The education kind of falls away. Or as one parent of a Premier League player now, top 4 club, maybe top 1 club, said to me, she wants to push her son through. He was academically bright. But as he got further and further up the ladder, the pressure to just play from the manager took him away from his studies. And it's one of the biggest things she regrets. He's got a pro contract, he'll do very well, he's doing very well. But that's one of the biggest things she regrets, because she's thinking about what happens post his career. So, in answer to your question, black excellence in sport exists, white excellence exists, brown excellence exists, right? How do you then build around it, right? I mean, that's the key thing. And it was all about football first, but now in terms of representation, but now we found ourselves providing financial education support, we're finding help with contracts, we're finding help with certain aspects of well-being, we're doing things with other partners, financial services company, legal people, we're having panels to try and give them the best advice. And then I'll end on this. Again, another former player who's got young boy coming through at the moment, who's also in the Premier League, he said to me, look, I've been there, I had a difficult time, but I understand contracts now, I can make it work. And I said, okay, I'm going to give you a panel of lawyers. So I gave him a panel of lawyers, and he chose one to deal with the contract of his son, who is a Premier League player. And I said, okay, do you mind if I sit in on your chat with the lawyer, who I knew, right? So I knew these lawyers. And I was sat there just listening. He didn't have a clue. He'd been transferred about 6 times to the biggest clubs in the world, right? Some of the biggest clubs in the world. He had some supposedly great agents. The questions he was asking was just absolutely abysmal, right? And he'd just get himself into the trap. And I had to pull him aside. And I said to him, look, I think you need some help and guidance on this, right? So when we talk about the scaffolding, yes, financial education, some legal support, and all those things matter. But also, footballers need to also look at themselves and recognise where their skills and their talents lie. And they need to build collaboration and partnerships that they can truly trust, which are outside their agents who want 10% of others. And that's where we come in. But, doing it for free and so on is very hard. Yeah. It's driven because we want to do the right thing. Sorry,
yes.
No, I think one of the biggest challenges that Delroy just alluded to is where were they supposed to learn that they needed to get those partnerships? And I find myself sitting on a college campus here, And I'm wondering, it's a question that I wondered a bunch, right? Because when we hear the story about the bad thing that happened after the good thing that happened, I got the big contract, but I was terrible at all of the things that happened thereafter, the negotiation, the paying the people, all of those things. The answer to your question about the scaffolding is where in the academy,
Yeah.
academy, large A academy, are we training the people who are going to go out and help the people before they get into the system, or as they're in the system, learn about scaffolding? Yeah, that's it.
And as we increasingly think holistically, and we think holistically about our scaffolding, is what does it look like to attend to the financial, the spiritual, the mental, the communal. And I know, Reverend Skinner,
Yeah.
okay, this is something that you think about and you walk alongside members with.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about what that looks like for you?
Yeah, I mean, but even to that point, because what you share about the scaffolding is, it has really jogged, a lot of thoughts. Because I think about what Damon Wayans, the African American comedian, shared. He has a great comedic legacy, Damon Wayans, but he has a bit where he talked about becoming the $14 million black man. And when you become that multi-million-dollar black man, all of a sudden you become the spokesperson for the black community, but you have to protect the interests that pays you. So he shares that he was, at an event, the interviewer came up to him and was like, so Damon Wayans, now that you have your $14 million that has come through the work that you do through the studios and movies and mostly from white executives who are billionaires paying you this $14 million, how do you feel about racism? And so he feels trapped. And I think about that athlete, right? Feeling the pressure. They obtain all this money, this wealth. They know they are dealing with a system that is using them as a pawn. But if they speak out, their livelihood is taken away. We can go down the list, right? Colin Kaepernick, and so on and so forth. And so, as Brother Joe alluded to, the academy, and this is why it's important for me as one who have worked and works with student athletes, who work with U.S. colleges, and by virtue of my connection to Dr. Jones, UK universities. In that developmental space of the academy, I ask a question, especially as I'm always asking the question as a faith leader, who am I listening to? Who am I listening to? Am I listening to those folks who are elevated by the system to actually manipulate? Or are there voices, as an activist, as U.S. Congressman John Lewis shared, understanding those folks who understand good trouble, necessary trouble? Who are the voices that get to the heart of getting beyond what is, as I shared earlier, what my uncle shared, is just because they're talking about it doesn't mean they're actually doing it.
Yeah.
And getting to the crux of that and calling to question even those institutions. And we have to recognize how important our institutions are in not only developing the young minds, but actually creating the structures and perpetrating certain sense of ideas and thoughts that may not be lining up. I mean, it's so much. I mean, the academy is under threat in the U.S. by an administration who is going after woke universities, right? Because this administration understands the importance. So we have to ask the question, who are we listening to? Because as I think about this young American football player, Brother Lacy, he was a football player for Louisiana State University, who took his life, let's say last year, right? They claim he was involved in the accident that killed a person, a motorist. Just last week, it may have made international news, but just last week, his lawyer submitted evidence, a video, that Brother Lacy was nowhere near the accident. However, the police report said everything to the contrary. And as a Black man in Black America, you are guilty before innocent. And even for this star football player, it was too much. Even though he knew he was innocent, the system said otherwise. And the system, as we know, is not geared towards especially marginalized people. So he took his life. But if we would listen, if we had already listened to the many Black women and Black men in America, we already know the system is set up in ways, again, that once you're in the constellation of law enforcement, everything is up against you, even if you're a successful football player. And so for those who are in these sort of spaces, these places of development, these institutions that say we are for developing and empowering these minds, I know that there's ways that we have to be more intentional to connect with students who are underrepresented in ways that not only do check-ins, but create spaces, safe spaces, where they can actually truly articulate the issues. But not only that, because what I find that these very people who are on the front line dealing with these inequities, these injustices, also have the solutions.
Yeah.
And so as we listen, we take seriously the solutions and support these underrepresented people, especially at these institutions, and say, you matter, your thoughts matter, how can we make it happen?
Yes, yes. I mean, I have colleagues in the room that are part of our Wellbeing Leads Network. And so at institutions like Cambridge, we've been thinking quite deeply about what belonging, well-being, and therefore retention, and closing those attainment gaps look like. And I enjoy what you're saying about providing platforms. You speak of necessary trouble, good trouble, a little bit of what's happening here. And creating spaces where people affected by this marginalization can articulate it, but they are also the people who have the solutions.
That's it.
And listening carefully. So I wonder, and you've worked with elite Black sportswomen and sportsmen, is what are some of those things that have been experienced as enabling? And how can we, as an academic setting here, learn from that?
The things that are most enabling are when people remove community from a person, because then you put people in community, small c, with people who don't have their best interest in mind. And so how are you evaluating Like the thing that I love, and I've been on faculty of Georgetown now for 18 years, teaching sports ethics and sports law. The thing that I love about the academy is that we have the ability to talk to the people who are going to be the people who are making the decisions after us, maybe long after I'm gone. And the thing that I am mindful of in this moment when you ask what is the enabling is that being able to tell someone no is an important skill to learn and a skill to have. And so how is the academy, how are the teachers, how are the college professors, how are the parents, how are the people in your life telling you that it's okay for you to say no? Okay to say no to the pressures that people may put on you to step away from your academics so that you can focus on the sport itself, knowing full well that that might cause you damage down the line. And how is it okay for you to say, no, I'm not going to pay for that thing for you that is a need, that is a want, not a need in this moment, because in the next moment when a need comes up, I won't have the ability to pay for it even if I want to. So one of the best things I think that the people in this room, especially the folks who are specializing in that wellness space, is the power in those two letters of no. In O, put together succinctly, making a full and complete sentence, whether it has punctuation or not. I believe in the power of that no. I know that the power of that no will carry many people into a future that they have not yet imagined, because what it will do is it will forestall them from believing that they need to go down every path that's presented to them, that they'll need to take advantage of every opportunity that's presented to them, that they'll need to consider every ask that is brought to them, and that they'll need to take care of every person that asks them to. The rule of thumb in my household was, and I know that I've said that I'm from a preacher's household, so hopefully you won't take this against me, because the rule came from my grandmother, who was not a preacher. If it is not a hell yes, then it is a hell no. And so, in considering how you pass along the messages, the moments, and the missives to the people who you're responsible for, I remind you that in many instances, if it is not a hell yes, then it should be a hell no.
Yes. And Delroy has an organization where you help members, people to be strategic. And I imagine you deliver this no quite often.
Which they don't like. Yeah, I think that it's hard for them, right? I'm not going to say it's easy. When you've just been, and I've kind of alluded to, when you've been a success, and everyone looks up to you, just because you can put the ball in the back of the net, start the ball pen in the back of the net, but to the nation, it's the nation's sport. And now we've got this build up to the World Cup. There's going to be even more of a spotlight on these players. They just exist in this wonderful, well, not so wonderful fishbowl, where they do get the microphone under their chin and they're supposed to talk about something in an eloquent way, when actually they've been given sound bites for when they go in front of the TV camera. But I think, when Joe's point around the no is important, because it took me probably the 2 years for the footballers to really trust me, right? There's now 200 on a WhatsApp group, and we use that as our community space, and we engage on various issues and jobs and other things. And it took them about that time to trust me, because prior to that, it is all these people just trying to use me for my name and my money and so on. And one thing I try and tell them, which I think is applicable to certain American sports, is if you can, you think of yourself as more than a footballer. Because when you start looking outside of the pitch, the green grass and so on, and you look at yourself holistically, you then see yourself as a human being, and not, in effect, a football kicked around by people who see you as a brand I can hire to talk about stuff, and it's public domain. Eventually, you could end up like John Barnes with £1.5 million bankruptcy against your name, right? So if you can see yourself as more than a footballer from an early age, I think that helps. But it's very tough. I mean, the football environment is very, very tough. I got another story, and I'm trying to give you a story rather than necessarily the data bits, just to give you a sense of some of the issues which we need to explore further. A young footballer gained elite, and he was told by his agent, apparently a good one, look, we've got a photo shoot with a well-known brand. They only want 20 minutes of your time, and you're going to get over a 5-figure sum if you just turn up. And the young kid missed it. He was just playing on his PlayStation for that duration of time, right? And his agent went, don't you see the value of the money? I mean, that could go to X, Y, and Z. And he said, well, I'm already getting 100,000, whatever, right? And that's enough for me. I don't need anything else. So he's not thinking about any investment strategy, right? He's not thinking much broader than that in terms of he's ambassador, brand ambassador for what could inspire a generation coming through, right? So there is a problem, I think, systemically within the game in terms of how it helps these young men who become elite navigate some of these big challenges that so many people want to populate their minds with in terms of which direction to go, which could indeed be a no, but they say yes because someone's told them to say yes. And then they lose out at 35 or 36 because it's a new start for them, right? They're starting from ground zero. So I think, you know, there are too many. Sadly, there are just too many enablers in the game. But what I take comfort from is because we've tackled the problems through data, and they understand data because they understand ball gaming and so on. When we say to them, look, 43 and 4 and on, you've heard me talk about that. But also we say, look, in a managerial sense, when you get a job, the data we've got from Professor Stefan Szymański is they don't get onto the ladder, the back players, in terms of managerial jobs. When they get a job, they don't get promoted like their peers. And even though their points total are as good, if not better than their peers, they're still 41% more likely to get fired. Sure. So that kind of gives them, wow, okay, so now we've got something to talk about, right? But the next stage where you confront the game is much harder because they're dependent on the game, because now they've lost their income, right? Now they're dependent on the game for that little $5,000 they might get as a pundit, or, they go with the club on an ambassadorial trip and so on. So, the system kind of ropes you back in because you don't know anything else. From the age of 8 upwards, you don't know anything else other than football. Right? And I don't look, they live a good life, a lot of them, in terms of, we've played the game, we'll always be around the football club. But, it hits them very hard and very quickly around their games. Why this is such a wonderful start of a conversation, because it hits them very hard and very quickly that actually they've lost the team spirit of the dressing room when they retire. 11 players or 22 players. Now they're on their own. As I say, a number of them get divorced very quickly. Right? So they are literally on their own. So, there's so much work that can be done in this area. We now have a football regulator. Let's talk about those things maybe at a later date. And that's going to be quite interesting how that develops. But Premier League is such a wonderful, powerful brand. It's UK PLC's greatest soft power in terms of sports, right? Government's not going to want to kill it by necessarily tackling some of these issues and bringing some of them to light. So we've got to find a way of collaborating, which is important, where we keep the golden goose going, and at the same time, which is a challenge, recognises a whole load of people that have been put on the scrap heap and may never progress to the heights of people they share the changing room with because of the colour of their skin. And that's quite disappointing.
There are a couple things that I'd like to follow up on what he said. Thing number one, that grass tops thing that he just snuck in on us again, which was brilliant, by the way, that I'm going to steal from you. I'll tell you that now. About how after you've reached your penultimate abilities on the field, sometimes you have no ability to earn off the field because of decisions that were made by people that are not you. That is something important that I don't want to get missed in this conversation. Because many times people, especially the folks in this room who've not actually been in the athlete's shoes, may wonder why this person is not turning up for interviews or not turning up to sign autographs or not doing these things. And then later in life, there'll be a narrative that will develop around that person that says that this person was rude while they were playing and therefore they should not get other opportunities. And that's the narrative just gets built into a thing. And so when a player then comes back and tries to be a coach or a manager, they'll say, well, you remember when he was a player, he wouldn't sign autographs. And so now that's why he's probably doing terribly in these interviews. And now those interviews are probably going terribly. And that's why he's not getting the job. And all of that could be just that the 20-year-old kid was playing on his video game and he decided that that was more important because no one took the time to explain to him the throughput of what that one action could be later down the line, 15, 20 years hence, that could stop him from being able to put on a suit and tie and walk on the pitch versus his trainers. And again, I bring that back to the conversation point that was made earlier. What should the people in the academy be doing? What should the people early in their lives be doing?
Yeah.
Spending more time explaining to them and helping them think through that entire sequence of events is one thing that I think becomes really important. But the other thing that I heard him say in that moment was that that the locker room, the thing that we all know as athletes, and for the people who performed in this room, you know, if you've been in a locker room, there's a moment when you'll walk out of that locker room and you'll never walk back into the same room again. And even if you've never been an athlete, that experience is something that may be familiar to you because there'll come a day when it's the last day you walk out of your dorm room and you'll never walk back in that dorm room again, or the last day you'll walk out of your fraternity house or your dining club or some place in your life and you'll never walk back into that place again because that moment will no longer exist. You only had 60 seconds and only 1 minute was in it, and that minute has moved on to the next, and the moving finger writes and having written moves on. And I want to say that this part of the conversation does not just apply to the athletes. So as you're thinking through the mental health aspect of this conversation, you should probably check in with the people in your lives because there's probably a room that they thought at some point they would be able to walk back into, but they cannot walk back into that room because that room no longer exists. And that is a crucial piece of perhaps what they're struggling with as they're trying to build a future that had a baseline of being in that room because they thought that being in that room was who they were, was a crucial part of their personality that they expected everyone else to expect them to be. And because they didn't develop that personality out of that room with enough depth and a great enough foundation, they may be struggling to try to find out what room they need to get in next. And they can't sit with themselves outside of the room because they feel outside. That's a part of this conversation that is often missed. Because I could be sitting here with $5 million in the bank, but all I want is to get back in the locker room. I could be sitting here with a job on TV, but all I want is to get back in the locker room. I could be sitting here with a wife and a kid who love me and a career that leads me to halls of fame and people who are inviting me to sit on couches in nightclubs with bottles of champagne in front of me and a life that looks glamorous on social media. But in that moment, I could be the saddest person in the world because all I really want is to sit in my locker again and tie up my boots. And I don't think that we spend enough time talking through that level of depression that comes from not just athletes, but the people, some of the people who you know as you sit in this room who may be struggling with that same thing.
Yeah, and just building on that in terms of the athlete, focus on that. So you're 35 and you retire, but the team you were in had 25-year-olds, 27-year-olds, 31-year-olds. Now you've retired, They're still your friends. So you have that 5 million, you're sat at home alone thinking, I wish I was back in the locker room. You're getting a call from the 24, 25-year-olds saying, come on, let's go out, right? They're buying a new car. Drinks on me. Right? So they're still buying that. They're buying a new car. They're doing fancy holidays. Those 24, 25-year-olds, they know 100 grand a week's coming in the following week. And you've only got 5 million, and now your income drops to 20,000 a year, if you're lucky, right?
Yeah.
So it just gets shipped away. And again, people just say, oh, well, you need to learn how to manage your money better and so on. But what I talked about earlier, your friendships, your networks, your connections, right? That's his focus. But if he, and I'm talking about he, 35-year-old isn't educated, and 24 and 25-year-old ain't educated, he just keeps repeating one generation after another. Doesn't matter how much money you give them, they've lost that locker room, they've lost their family. They've lost that warmth, they've lost that community, and it quickly just keeps on going. So, I think from my perspective, from an academic perspective, we, as I said, we work with academics and we crunch the data. What we actually need to do is get to the bottom of that human experience, right? Because that's when you start being able to tell some of those much richer stories, I think, which then starts making people realise that actually they're more than just the number 11 on the back of their shirt. It does play into other aspects of life.
Yeah. And before we turn to the audience for some questions, what we're speaking about here is what, in my field, perhaps we would call adjustment difficulties that sometimes turn into adjustment disorders. And if I think about the work we do in a Cambridge setting, as many of our students join us from all over the world, and they've made it to Cambridge, but thinking perhaps beyond what attaining that degree looks like, what attaining that accreditation looks like, and really providing platforms, providing spaces to talk about how difficult it can be at the beginning to transition in, how difficult it can be at the end to think about what does life post-Cambridge mean, and to really acknowledge those mental health difficulties that happen behind the scenes as you achieve excellence because you're here, but also think about what's next. And I'm really, as we turn our attention to our audience and invite some thoughts, some reflections, some things that stood out for us. I'm wondering, what really centering mental health as we manage adjustments, as we seek to develop community and bring those of us who experience marginalization to the center, what that looks like and how we embed that. So I'll open to the floor for any reflections. I see 2 hands. I see 3. I'll start here, and then we'll move there and there, and we'll do our next round.
Thank you. Yeah, William Acker from Birkbeck, University of London. A really great panel, really good presentation. I think what struck me, and then I folded into a question, in the sense when you spoke about the genes and the genes that, in a sense, throughout our history as Black people, isn't it, in Western societies, there's a use and abuse culture. That when we're useful to the society, they'll kind of tolerate us to do things. When we become not useful, we get thrown away. And we're seeing this in the sports realm, and in that realm of kind of racial capitalism and hyper-individualism that makes it a lot worse. So I'm kind of wondering, though, have you seen pockets in your various experiences where there is a kind of counterculture, where there is a kind of sense of Black collectivity that can kind of battle against that kind of individualism, where footballers, NFL players are getting good pensions, do have good support networks and are moving on. And what does that look like? And can those small pockets maybe be modelled institutionally within a kind of a black framework?
What an excellent question. Before we speak about what have you seen countercultures and how do we grow those, can we just take the questions and then we'll come back to the panelists?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the panel. It reminds me of Will Rodden's book, $40 Million Slaves, that used the analogy of the plantation to really speak about the way professional sports happens in the United States. And my question is really about the future. So I'm a PhD student here. I study digital humanities, and I spend a lot of my time thinking about IP and AI. And I'm thinking specifically, as we're having this conversation about compensation, what happens to the player's likeness and image in situations where they could be used to train models, where they do not even earn the right to make money from those models. They're now being shown on Netflix as opposed to the BBC or some other television. Well, no, the BBC doesn't advertise, but I'll use US analogies like CBS or these other commercial stations where they can be paid off the advertising. And then they get into similar issues that we saw in Hollywood last year, where because of streaming contracts, the actors and actresses are getting like a penny from the shows as opposed to what they would have got on other networks. And so my question is sports law thinking about these new IP questions, where even if you own the talent, even if you own the club, it's the platform that is making the money. It's Meta, it's TikTok, it's whoever. How are you accounting for that? And how do you think this reinforces this $40 million slave thing that propels it into an AI age?
What a lovely question about the future and sports law and whether we're thinking long term about the implications of that. Thank you. Lastly, over here.
So, firstly, thank you for supporting the best club in the United Kingdom, 60 years, an Arsenal supporter. Excellent. Although I have to part company with you, as a Welshman, I did not enjoy yesterday. My experience of this was very much goes back to the time when I was actually working in Wales, and it's resonates with me what you were saying about community. You have to understand rugby in Wales is a community-based sport, and players very rarely will be transported out of that community environment. And that places them in a supportive scenario where the scenario is actually built up. So the locker room is a community in its own right. It's a very powerful community for those who've experienced it. And yes, that hankering I could really resonates to it. But that other community begins to provide that level-headedness. So as a medic, I used to have to speak to the Welsh regional clubs. They're not being very successful at the moment, but I used to have to speak to them. There's one statistic I used to give every aspiring rugby union professional. You're 2.5 years as a professional from a life-changing injury. That's all you've got. So you've got to make the most of it. And if you decide to spend the resources you're being given in an inappropriate way very early on, you are going to suffer. But we were able to create a separate community within the universities in Wales because of the unique nature of the sport and the interaction with the government, that actually the universities agreed with clubs that we would take the individuals who were actually studying with us. And we don't want them licking envelopes and sticking stamps on envelopes, but actually we extended their curriculum to enable them to actually aspire to a future career. So we were interested in them as individuals. Yes, they were stars in their own right. But, you know, the captain, Gwyn Jones, who actually broke his neck playing for Swansea against Cardiff, because of that system, he was able to continue his work in the pharmaceutical industry because he'd actually had that support from a community. So this matters. The question for me goes back to that legal position. We will now have a football regulator in the United Kingdom. Isn't it about time that we look after those players who never make it to the top? There's going to be less sympathy from the general public of those who decide to squander their money on, £1 million sports cars and things, as opposed to those who never make it. And shouldn't the regulator be looking at the contracts being offered to very young individuals and make mentorship and actually protecting them in those very early formative years when they are actually a minor, and that contracts cannot be negotiated just by Mr. 10%, but actually should be scrutinised by an external body that takes the player's interest in the first instance? Because I worry about that 99% who don't make it. End up playing for Newport County as opposed to Arsenal. That's the two extremes of the current pyramid. There's a world of difference that you'll experience.
What happens to those who don't make it? Before we turn to the panel, one last question from actually one of our panelists at last year's Black History Month panel, who's also similarly like Delroy, spoke a lot about data. Ebenezer.
I'll be real quick. You guys, great panelists. I'm going to steal so many of the things you said. Not everyone who talks about heaven goes to heaven, but not everyone who talks about inclusivity practices it. Jeans and juice, I'm stealing that. And the boy playing PlayStation, who misses out on a 20 grand contract. There are some specific examples that are unique to the Black community, for sure. You guys have provided that. But I wonder, extreme wealth and then your career ending around 35 and then your income dropping substantially, or focus on athletic ability but lack of focus on, if I understood correctly, kind of general education. This seems to be common, is it not, across different races? Is it appropriate to maybe look at learning from different races, or are there unique challenges to the Black community that the white community maybe don't face?
And if I may add, I would like to know whether there are nuances when it comes to other sports like rugby. I mean, referring to your education, but so if you look at rugby in the UK, there is, most of them tend to come through the private school system and all that. Does that play a part in just building on his question?
Thank you very much. The first question around counterculture.
I was going to say, can I do the last question?
Sure. Start from the back.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it links, right? I mean,
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, so I've got to know actually an owner of a rugby union club, worth a lot of money, not as much as those who own the Premier League clubs, but worth a lot of money. And the ethos, I know one or two people who run Premier League clubs are at the top. The ethos of the people at the top of rugby union feels very different to those in football. They are very much player-centred, community-centred. They're doing it almost like a community ethos. I want to give back. It's a love of the sport. It's not a money-making venture. I mean, rugby's got its own issues, right? We'll need to look at the finances. And I think that then has filtered down into their player care. So I went to a game, it was at Tottenham, you probably guessed the clubs, I tell you, Saracens, Harlequins, and the old players were there. And you talk to them, and they go, yeah, the club makes sure I get a job here and a job here outside the game, and then they bring me back in, right? So there seems to be a longer standing relationship between the player and the club than perhaps in football, where they bring them back, it tends to be as an ambassador, right? But also, the socio-economic group does play to it quite significantly, right? And here's an example. So in rugby, as I think it's been pointed out, not always in Wales, over here, right? A lot of the players do go to university and they come from relatively wealthy family. In Wales, it's passion, right? It's the national sport, it's everything. Um, and they get an element of support from their parents, and they don't make it, they play semi-professional, they do other things, right? Football, I went to see a Premier League, when I started this journey, I went to a Premier League club. I used to have my former coach actually, and he was head of education and welfare. He said to me, don't worry, he said, look, one of the problems we have, and I told him what we do, is he said, look, the players are so desperate to make it, even when you tell them they're not good enough, they are still trying desperately to make it. So when they should be pursuing education and other things, they still continue to try and be this footballer. So I think and he said, a lot of them single parents and so on, right? He said the socioeconomic group plays differently in football than it does in rugby. And I think rugby is an interesting case to look at, right? And then you talk about the football regulator. I mean, poking chest out. We've been into the government, in Downing Street, talked to various politicians and so on. And why was the football regulator brought in? They want to stop the formation of a Super League. In effect, there is a Super League now, because the Champions League is spread out as well. And also, they wanted the fans to have a greater voice, right? But there's no doubt, because I've told you, there's evidence that says, well, the regulator needs to do far more in these areas. But what the government's very clear on is it doesn't want to kill the golden goose. It's ticked a box on its manifesto commitment. Doesn't mean it actually now wants it to do anything, right? So the politics of that influencing the political network is what's going to be required if you want to get some form of change to the objectives. And I've met quite a lot of people to do it, and it's quite clear they want to have a regulator, but they don't want to run the game, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be something that will play out over a period of time, and it will take fans largely and constituencies to make it work. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Thank you.
All right, but Joe's your guy for the AI question. Yeah. Tell them why, Joe.
We'll talk about it. But first, before I get to that question, I'd like to weigh in on this question as well, just to say that while it may not always be racial, it usually is socioeconomics, right? And the way that these outcomes play out differently in these populations, right? Because if I came from a family that valued education through a private academy and a private school system that then led me to a university and then eventually to professional athletics, more than likely I have a system of people around me who are also similarly situated, right? Like they went through a private academy or some education, and they also have jobs, and they also have income generation, and those people put me in places so that I can learn things to help me if I came into wealth. But if I didn't come from that world, then the people around me don't know how to tell me to manage the world that I have been placed in. And because they believe that I've made more money than they'll ever be able to see, then they're going to ask the person with the most resources to give the most help to everyone else in their system. And so, yes, the different outcomes do sometimes play out on racial lines, but I think that it's also a greater socioeconomic impact and fault line that we have to think about when we think about the scenario. Now over to the other question. I love that you use 2.5 years, because in American football, that number goes up just slightly to 3.5 years. So in the 3.5 years that a person is a professional NFL player, which is the average length of an NFL career, is just south of 3.5 years, about 3.42 years. If that 3.42 years happens, and by and large it doesn't, most players are 2 years and below. If that because the numbers skew, because there are a number of players who play 10 plus years, right? And so averages. So 3.4 years. That means that by the time, if you started playing NFL football at 22, by the time you're 26, you're done. Not 35 like in soccer, you're done at 26, which means that you have to do something else with the rest of your life, especially since the average age is somewhere around 70, right? And so that means that you got almost 40 plus 45 years that you have to cover. You have to cover with earnings, you have to cover with jobs, you have to cover with paying your bills. And so that money that you earned in those 2.5 and 3.5 years has to help you figure out all of that. Now, if you spent all your resources on the front end and you're also experiencing this depression from not being able to go back in the locker room, there are all these other things that get factored into that. And so now that socioeconomic status that you have, you also, by the way, you can't just go back and you can't it's not only that you cannot go back into the locker room, you also, in many instances, cannot go home. Realistically, to the neighborhood that you came from, because to the neighborhood that you came from, you were a superstar. And if you are no longer a superstar, the embarrassment of not being a superstar, whether it's right or wrong, prevents you from being able to go home. So now, not only do you not have the support system of the club that you no longer play for, you also don't have the support system of the home, the city, the town, the country even in some instances that you came from to go back to so that you can then start your life back over, or at least continue on a life path that would have been otherwise uninterrupted if you did not have athletics. And so all of those things have to come into the consideration of how we then come up with systems to replace the locker room, to help them understand the nature of the 2.5 or 3.5 years of the short span of a career, when based on everyone else in this room will have 30 to 40 years of a life earning cycle. You'll have 10 years to develop all of the things that you need. In your 20s, you'll be able to miss paying your rent a few times, maybe even get kicked out of an apartment, and it won't end up on the front page of the news. You won't have people embarrassing you because you decided that you could not afford to pay gas, put petrol in your car this month. But if you're a professional athlete, even a former professional athlete, and you show up at the station and have to ask someone to borrow a 20 so that you can get some gas in your car, then that not only becomes front page news, it's all over social media and you've gone viral now. And all of those things aren't always considered in the way that they should be. And I think that those socioeconomic factors play a much bigger role in some instances than race. And so I'll stop there.
Thank you. I do want to leave time.
But I want to get to this.
I'm conscious of the time.
She said she has to go.
So I want to end that future focus question around sports law and that future focus question around cultures. Just to end.
All right. Biometric data is going to be the most important thing that comes out of sport in the next 5 years. Artificial intelligence, including artificial intelligence used to generate video and content, is going to be something that we all have to keep our eye on. We've been fighting the fight on counter intelligence related to biometric data in the States for years. Name, image, and likeness rights aren't a new thing. There were lawsuits around name, image, and likeness rights as early as the 1930s in the United States of America, when Davy O'Brien's image was used to sell beer when he was a player for the Philadelphia Eagles, but he didn't drink alcohol. And so he sued because the people were using his image to sell beer. I know Bill Rhoden. We've had our debates. He's a great guy. The book is a great book for those who haven't read it. $40 Million Slave is a great introduction to the subject of how bodies are being used to make money for people who are not turning that money back over to those bodies that are being used. But that concept is something that we should all be concerned about, because it isn't just the athletes that are now being now having their biometric data captured, collected, and perhaps even rebranded and used. It is everyone in this room. It is everyone in this room. So everyone in this room should be thinking more about what's happening with your intellectual property, the movements of your body, the things that you're putting into your devices that you have on you at all times, and the things that are coming out of those devices, the aids that you're using to help you with your daily lives. Who actually owns that information? You're putting this information into these various chatbots and other things, thinking that it's cute and it's helpful, and sometimes it is. And I do work for a tech company now, and I'm going to ask you to continue to do that. But I'm also going to say to you, just be mindful of what you're doing, because the thing that you are doing could be stopping the future that you thought that you were going to create. And so I'd love to have more conversation with you about that. If anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm Joe Briggs, ESQ on LinkedIn any day. You can follow me later and we'll find out time to talk about it.
Thank you.
And I don't have time to talk about the other question, but I'll find that person. So
Yes, we do have a drinks reception after this, so there'll be time to dialogue. Please join me in thanking our excellent
say a few words. I'm looking at my notes. I just stopped taking notes after about 10 minutes because it was so rich, and the act of taking notes would have ruined the experience for me. I think this is the most poetic panel I've listened to, but there was much power in the poetry. And I thank you very much for coming here this evening and talking with us and sharing. I can't even begin to summarise it, so I'm not going to do that. We've learned a great deal about a great many things. The one thing that will stick with me, two main things, about the life cycle of elite athletes and elite black athletes. We've learned a great deal about that and some very striking facts and figures to take away. But also that everyone's got a locker room. As my wife does, the worst move for us is we got a smart TV which has YouTube on it, and it links me into all sorts of stuff, mainly about football. Former professional footballers, Roy Keane, the whole lot, every night talking about very frequently this trope of the locker room, the changing room. And now I understand that so much better. I'm afraid I'll be watching all the more intently to follow that.
Thanks, guys.
But I thought it was very powerful just to link that out from the topic that we were talking about. That will remain with me, that we all have locker rooms and people around us that we need to take care of and think about. So thank you all very much.
Moderator. Excellent job.
Thank you everyone for joining us. It's so lovely to see familiar faces, new faces. We do have some drinks at the back, and our panelists, please, I know there was so much there, will stay around, so feel free to grab them to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Just some closing words. Just some closing words. I was struck by the thread of sports and ethics, and I just want to put a pin on that. As we think about Black masculinity, particularly as a person who works in music, often Black masculinity is reduced to some form of toxicity. And I just want to underscore how we are blessed to experience thinking, believing, well-intended Black masculinity here tonight. And again, I want to thank the Master of St. Edmund's College for providing the space for us to experience that.
That's great. Oh, wonderful.
My as a photographer.